This is the Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Jason Jones Show Thanksgiving special edition, and I have something exciting for you. Yesterday on the show, if you caught yesterday's show, I talked about Squanto, and you need to watch the movie on Squanto by Disney with your family for Thanksgiving. And I realized Squanto is my favorite American. I think he's the first American. And I thought, what better guest to have? If I could have any guest to talk about Squanto, than the national treasure, the hero, Eric Metaxas. But I couldn't get Eric Metaxas. Stephen Harriet, welcome to the Jason Jones Show.
Thank you, and I want to apologize from the bottom of my heart for not being Eric.
You're forgiven. You're forgiven.
I've always felt that. Ever since I discovered Eric Metaxas, I've always thought, man, I'm sorry I'm not that guy.
You know what, Eric? No one is that. That guy isn't he amazing?
He is. He's a really interesting guy, and I have a feeling I've never really hung out with him. I met him. I think he signed a book at some event where he was a speaker, and I went backstage for a minute. But I imagine he'd be a lot of fun to hang out with.
You know what? He is a friend of mine, and I've had the privilege of hanging out with him. And if this were just you and I talking and it wasn't being broadcast, I would exaggerate and say like he's my best friend. We're bros. But that's not true. But we have hung out together, and I think he considers me a friend. You know, I think I think he'd say Jason Jones is my friend. He's my friend. And but what I love about Eric is this is a guy that could have easily made the choice to just go establishment. You know what I mean? The establishment, actually, everyone loves him, but he's very courageous. Would you?
Yeah. It's I can't think of another example to quite match him in that regard. I mean, he's stood on stage with Barack Obama. And he has, had a life, almost a career-long friendly relationship with Dick Cavett and all of this stuff. And, it's funny, actually, even when he was on stage with Barack Obama, he was somehow, in a way I could never pull off, he was able to be completely, orthodox, completely courageous and unbending in his beliefs, even sang Amazing Grace. And he just sort of sucked all of the dignity to himself in that room. Barack Obama's there in the lesser position, seated, looking up at Eric Metaxas singing a Christian classic to him after he's remarked very bluntly about the atrocity of abortion on demand.
Right.
And it's like somehow he did that without ruining the mood. I don't know how he does that.
No, and you could see, I'll never forget when Barack Obama kind of turned and looked up at him with complete admiration and awe. Do you remember that? Do you remember when there's this image of Obama looking up at Eric chastising our nation for abortion, and the president of the United States, who didn't agree with him, was in utter awe of this man for having the courage to do this? And now the audience is just so really upset you're not Eric Metaxas. They're like, what in the world? Why is this guy not Eric Metaxas?
Yeah, I thought we were going to come on and talk about the great American hero Squanto, but instead we're giving an apotheosis to Eric Metaxas.
Okay, let's talk. Because Eric wrote a book on Squanto, but you wrote a several paragraph email that I received yesterday on Squanto. So I thought, I'll get Steven. Steven's going to come on. Here's why I wanted to talk to you. You sent an email out for Catholic Vote. Can we talk? I can say that, right? On the air, for Catholic Vote. Can we promote you guys? Am I allowed to?
Well, I didn't send out an email, but yeah, I work for Catholic Vote.
You work for Catholic Vote, and Catholic Vote sent out an email, and I read it, and I know you, and you work at Catholic Vote, and I'm going to send Catholic Vote an invoice because I'm promoting them right now.
All right, I'll let them know.
Yeah, let them know invoices come. But anyway, I read the email, and you guys were talking about Squanto, and then you and I, as bros, were just talking about Squanto. I said, you need to come on the show, and because to me, he's really the first citizen of the New World. That's what I think. I think he's the first truly American character.
That there's something to that. One of my favorite novels is The Virginian by Owen Wister. I think that every especially young man should read it. But there's a lot of great passages. There are a lot of great passages in this novel about what it means to be an American and so forth. And one of the things in it is it's talking about this nobility or aristocracy, and it said it's basically inherent in the human person. And he said the great thing about America isn't that it tore down the aristocracy; it's that it allowed anyone to join it, and those who are naturally not worthy can't, because you can't pretend to it. It's really interesting stuff. But that's kind of the story of Squanto, isn't it? He came from kind of anonymity. He wouldn't have appeared in our histories, and in fact, he was denigrated below the average Native American Joe, in that he was abducted and enslaved and mistreated and all of this stuff, and yet comes out the other end of that, this very noble character.
Yeah, that is beautiful that we don't eradicate an aristocracy, but we allow anyone to enter it. Again, like we're talking about Eric Metaxas. Here's just a guy standing on stage lecturing the president of the United States. And here was Squanto, who had been enslaved. His entire tribe, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they all died from disease that was not intentionally transmitted from the English, but that the English unfortunately carried with them to the New World. And so his entire people was wiped out, which is just really unbelievable to think about how devastating that could be. You and I were talking, I'm like, he would most definitely qualify for a marijuana card in Colorado for PTSD. I think being enslaved, sent on a sailing ship across the Atlantic Ocean to an alien people, and then coming back a decade later on another sailing ship to, you have to imagine the whole time he was away, his every moment was filled with fantasies of seeing all of his loved ones again. Could you imagine? And then arriving, and then they're all gone. It's just unbelievable. Me, I'm daydreaming about going back to Hawaii every day. Like maybe I'll go back in January. I can't wait. And imagine going back and everyone I knew and loved was gone. And then now he's with a more warlike tribe, and he becomes the bridge between two worlds, and the perfect bridge, really.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I love that. That's the thing that I like about Squanto, because on the one hand, if you know Squanto is, you probably have heard of him in this sort of Precious Moments children's cartoon kind of iconic way that's very simple. And there is a sort of innocence to his story that means that kind of story isn't, it's not like a disservice, and it's a good teaching method for, new generations. And at the same time, though, he's been through this tremendous trauma. And that, to me, also tells the story of the sort of journey of, ennoblement that's available to us, or ought to be, as Americans. And that's another thing that I, could kind of see is that another thing that makes him sort of the quintessential first American citizen. So I like that idea.
So as Catholics, we like to tell the story about how Squanto was enslaved by Protestant English, freed by noble Catholic monks, taught a trade, given some money, and sent home, where then he became the go-between between Puritans. We like to chuckle amongst ourselves. Ha, ha, ha. These Puritans were fleeing Romanism, and they run right into the only Roman Catholic on the Eastern Seaboard, and their lives are saved by him. How Catholic do we know? I mean, how Catholic was he really? Is there truth to that? I mean, he was,
Well, ultimately, he became very Catholic because he died. And ultimately, everyone's Catholic at that point.
Wow.
No, I'm not sure. There's not a ton of detail in the historical record in the first place, but also, I'm not Eric Metaxas, so I haven't researched it enough to give you a really definitive answer. I don't know about his daily practices. I don't know whether he carried a breviary or prayed the rosary necessarily. But I do think that there's something about the narrative you were just mentioning that tends to miss the point. Because I've heard that same story. There's this sort of Catholic tribal pride that tends to say, "Hey, look at this! We have a Catholic in Squanto," and he saved the world
and he saved the
and
Puritans.
Right. But in fact, actually, as far as I can tell, it was much more, it's as much a flattering story of the Puritans as it is of Squanto or the friars who instructed him in the faith and baptized him, because it was mutual, right? He was abducted during one dispute, and the Puritans went and rescued him. He was a friend to them, and they were to him. That, if anything, says something that's a little bit beyond the point you were mentioning about sort of, we have a Catholic in this, this Catholic iconic figure. Beyond that, there's also it's sort of almost like a presaging of the religious toleration that is like written into the blood of America, which is a beautiful thing. Because the Puritans themselves, you got to think they have some understanding of at least a burgeoning or a beginning understanding of our modern concept of human rights, because they were persecuted for being Puritans. Their sect was this weird little sect that was different from the rest of Protestant England, and no one had any place for them. That's why they left. Well, yeah. I mean, that's why some of them left.
G.K. Chesterton said every 4th of July the English should send the Americans a thank you card for taking the Puritans from England, right? So, yeah, even today, there's that sort of, like, thank God those people left. Centuries later, they're happy in England. Right. But
I mean, in a way, you could say that their place in the social hierarchy, so to speak, was kind of lowest of the low. I mean, who likes them? No one was like, oh, great, the Puritans, they're the best. Let's take care of them. And similarly, who would say who would say that about an enslaved? So you can't get lower on the totem pole than that socially. Roman Catholic Native American. Right? So they had something in common right away, and in that from their individual experiences together, they're already probably more humble, more tolerant people than a lot of the European folks in the background.
And maybe they had been humbled, right? Because I mean, the Puritans, their whole deal was the Anglicans are too Romanish for us.
Yeah,
we'd rather sail across the ocean to an unknown land than to be around these Romanish or whatever, these Catholic-like Anglicans. And yet,
right,
when they get to the New World, all of a sudden, that hostility towards Catholics already they're partnering with the Catholic, and then in the peace treaty between the two tribes by the English and then in the Native Americans that was brokered by Squanto was the longest. I know this. I'm not Eric Metaxas, but I know this was the longest peace treaty that went that was faithfully held to of all treaties between the colonists from the New World and the Native Americans. It was the longest. I think it lasted 75 years, and that was brokered by Squanto. Now, you had told me some sort of calumny or gossip of the age. Can we talk about that? Because I think it's interesting of what some of the Puritans were saying about Squanto.
Yeah, well, this is just a little rumor, but what I heard was some folks said that Squanto was taking advantage of his privileged position as the only person who knows both tongues, right?
Yes.
So with the natives, he'd go to the natives and say, hey, guess what? The Englishmen have the plague literally contained in their basement, and they can let it out whenever they want. And if you don't do as I say, the Englishmen will kill you, right? And then he'll go back to the English and play the other side. And hey, they're going to make a big mess of things, or they're going to go to war with you if you don't. They're going to kill you in your sleep or whatever. So he would kind of use that to I guess, enrich himself is the suggestion. And this was some local, a contemporary letter that I read a snippet of.
Yeah, what shocked me about that letter was, first of all, how would they know? So, and also there could be other. This is when you and I started talking about the trauma and the PTSD that Squanto. This is this is what my whole problem with Antifa and BLM, when they try to judge people in the past as if they weren't really humans, right? Like they're not looking at them as humans and trying to understand the setting and experiences that they were going through. So I could imagine that Squanto, who his whole tribe was wiped out from a plague, who had suffered slavery, who had been removed from his home for a decade, I could see how, and they don't understand, just as confused as we are by COVID, how confused were they of the plague? And there could have been all sorts of misunderstandings and miscommunications. And Squanto wasn't even of the same people of the tribe he was living with, because his tribe had died. So he could have felt almost as alien from them as he did from the quote-unquote white man. And then you have this guy Squanto, but in the midst of all of it, what did he do? He brokered a peace. And that, I find it interesting, even at the time, his motives were maybe being questioned. And I don't understand how, the only way I knew about Squanto growing up was thanks to the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving special.
Nice.
Did you ever see the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving special?
No.
You should be ashamed of yourself. Are you kidding?
I know. I'm pretty uncultured.
No, 100%.
I only know things like actual original sources and letters and things.
No,
from the founders.
Yeah, no, you were
not the Charlie.
Were you homeschooled?
So, that's right, and that's why, by the way, I really relate to both Squanto and the Puritans, because they're a lot more like sort of frumpy homeschooled Catholics than anyone else nowadays.
See, I was a latchkey kid who I had to rely on the television to educate me. And so all I knew as a latchkey, and I will tell you as a latchkey kid, we don't use that term latchkey kid anymore. Isn't that interesting? I was thinking about this.
It's probably considered, I don't know, some maybe homophobic or racist or
I think
one of those things.
I think every kid is probably a latchkey kid today. Right? I think that the idea of have you ever heard the expression latchkey kid?
I have, yeah, right? It means like you're semi-feral and you have to like sneak in and out.
No, a latchkey kid is I was definitely a feral kid. But a latchkey kid is a kid whose parents, he doesn't have parents at home, so he has to carry a little key to let himself in and out. And
right.
So I will tell you about around Thanksgiving time, as a latchkey kid, it was very, it got darker earlier. And when you're a kid without adults at home, and when in my mom's house, both my mom and my dad worked actually at my dad's house too. And so those when the sun set early, that meant you were home for many, many hours alone in the dark. And that was a very uncomfortable feeling, And I will say that me and my siblings, we would gather around the TV. That would be our fire, and they would keep us safe and warm. And it would be television, and it'd be different strokes or facts of life. But holidays as a latchkey kid were especially sometimes very strange and lonely. And my mom worked on Thanksgivings, as did my dad, my stepdad. So we could be alone for most or part of the day or the whole day on days like Thanksgiving. And usually my stepdad would take us to Taco Bell. I'm not kidding you. Taco Bell and a movie. That would be our Thanksgiving thing. But watching the Charlie Brown special was very comforting as a kid. There were other specials as well around holidays that were very comforting. But that Charlie Brown Thanksgiving special was just such a bright spot in my life as a kid. And it was such a beautiful special. But Squanto plays a big part in it. I never learned about Squanto in school. I guess you probably did, though. I mean, having that homeschool experience, you had a better education. And so did you know the Squanto story growing up?
No. So I always tell people, they ask me, were you homeschooled? And I just say, well, no, I was just home. So
this is getting a dark turn. Yeah. So now you can't share this episode with your mom. So you were sort of the early days of homeschooling where parents were pioneers and sort of on their own and didn't have a lot of resources.
Say again?
So your mother, I mean, when your mother was homeschooling you, there weren't a lot of resources. There weren't co-ops. There weren't pioneers that had paved the trail for those of us who homeschool now to learn from. And so I have to imagine it was quite challenging for your mother and for you. So you're saying a lot of times you just felt like you were left to learn on your own?
Yeah, pretty much. So, I mean, and they're also different from kid to kid. So the older kids, all of it's started, the whole homeschooling experiment started in my parents' case because the eldest kids came home from a public school classroom and said, they're teaching us some ideological stuff. So my parents resisted the public school system and said, you can't talk to my kids about, asking them, what's going on at home in this creepy way. They felt like they were being intruded on. So they pulled the eldest three kids out of public school, right? And for the first few years, they were doing kind of formal homeschooling with a co-op, with, as formally as they could with curricula. They sent the eldest daughter off to a boarding school, a religious boarding school, for some semesters. But anyway, I'm one of the youngest kids. So by the time it came to me and my immediate siblings, my dad had discovered a very convenient loophole, which is called unschooling. Unschooling is actually, have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah. There's people in our homeschool community that are big believers in unschooling.
Yeah, it's a thing. It sounds like a joke at first, but no. The idea is your children will choose their own interests and pursue them, and you need only sort of minimally support their interests from afar. You don't have to actually give them everything, spoon feed them each subject.
Well, you are a very successful and incredible writer. So would you credit that to unschooling?
Possibly. Well, and thank you. I mean, the thing is, my dad told me actually once when I was a kid, he said, when Abraham Lincoln was 14 years old, he couldn't read. And then he got it in his head to be a lawyer. So he taught himself to read. And he said, you're going to be the same way. I don't care how old you are, 14, 25. When you have an ignition go off inside of you where you're inspired to pursue something, you will do it and learn the adjacent things as necessary. You're going to learn geometry if it becomes necessary in your passion and you have to learn it. And I'd rather you do that than be a slave driver and push various topics into you just because that's what one ought to learn. So that was his philosophy. My mother died when I was 14 years old. And so my dad's philosophy really dominated, especially in my later childhood. So, yeah, we were unschooled. Well, and what it meant for me, by the way, is that I learned next to nothing for a long time. Then I was a visual artist, and I was an absolute prodigy at that. I was very good at drawing. And then a little while later, I dropped that and picked up music. And honestly, Jason, within less than a year of picking up the guitar, I was performing original songs for money on stage. I mean, and so I was like, oh, my dad's vindicated. It works. And the same thing happened with writing and editing, really.
So, but don't you think, did the unschooling start when you were young, or did you get basic, like the rules of grammar and math out of the way before you began unschooling?
I distinctly remember being very young, Mom trying to teach me to read and closing the book and saying, forget it. We'll try this again sometime later, because I was so bad at it. And I was a slow student. And my mom used to tell me, I'm thanking goodness that you never went to public school, because they would have put you in remedial classes and you would have felt permanently like the dumb kid. But as it was just like, I'm not going to bother with Stephen with regard to that subject because he's so annoying when I try to teach him to read.
That's so interesting. Now, there's a writer that I love. Maybe your dad was influenced by him. His name is Ivan Illich. Are you familiar with this guy?
Ivan Illich?
Yeah.
As in the death?
Yes.
I didn't know it was an author. I just know the death of Ivan Illich.
No, this guy. No, this guy is.
Sorry, A Day in the Life.
That's a different guy. No, this guy wrote books on unschooling. He was a priest. Okay. Anyway, I digress. But he was a big advocate of unschooling. And here's the problem with unschooling. I think it really probably works really, really well with some kids, and then with other kids, it's a catastrophe. I have a daughter. My daughter Isabella, when she was 3, she met Nicole Scherzinger, the lead singer of the Pussycat Dolls, and she has a TV show called The Masked Singer now. So when she met Nicole, she looked at me. She was 3 years old. She said, Dad, what does she do? I said, she's a pop star. And it was like, she said, that's what I want to be. Then that was it.
Nice.
The next day, she's like, Dad, can I take dance? The next day, Dad, and then a couple weeks later, Dad, I want to join choir at church. So now, she's 10 years old. It's been 7 years. And she is ruthlessly committed to dance, now we moved to Texas. She said, Dad, can I take drama or improv? She's 10 years old. I want to take drama. I want to take improv. So she's in an improv class with all teenagers and adults, maybe 7 years.
Wow.
So she is like, and she takes the violin. I'm like, do you like the violin? She's like, oh, yeah, I love it. I'm like, well, where would you rank it in your activities? Because I kind of felt like she didn't love it. So she's like, well, I guess number one would be improv, then ballet, then modern, so she lists like 10 things, of course, last being the violin. So I'm like, oh, so you don't like the violin? She goes, no, I love it. But it's just 10th on the list. Then I have a son, he will remain nameless. If I unschooled him, he would eat Doritos all day and play Fortnite for sure, and nap. He would nap a lot.
Yeah.
So I think you got to be careful with the unschooling.
Well, we've got kids now, one little boy and one little girl. So we got to figure it out soon. But I think my wife is going to be much more like a strict kind of German with our kids than my mom was. My mom sent me on a lifelong search for a polite word for lazy. We learned a lot, by the way, just from looking over her shoulder. I used to call her a walking dictionary. She was very good with words. She had beautiful handwriting, and she was constantly reading. And what she did with us is, by the time I was 10, I couldn't read, Jason. I could not read when I was 10 years old. But at the same time, I would be able to say, yeah, I've read The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I've read most of Dickens, because my mom read aloud to all of us.
Unbelievable.
That was a huge part of our childhood.
But you really couldn't read at 10?
No, I couldn't read until I was about 11 years old. And then I went pretty quickly right into reading novels for young adults, mostly Westerns. And by the time
when did you read The Virginian? I mean, that's considered the first Western, right?
Well, I didn't read that until I was in my 20s.
Okay.
But I wished because it's brilliant. But no, by the time I was 12, I was writing. I was like, I said I want to be a novelist. And so, yeah, anyway, it is kind of true. I mean, I don't know, like you said, be careful with it. But in my experience, the unschooling thing did produce some fruit.
I mean, look, we were talking earlier today when you had your YouTube show. I thought it was the best around. It's professionalism and it's content, your delivery, and I wish you'd go back to doing more of that. But it's amazing how you went from not reading to writing in 2 years, and the kind of self-confidence that your parents would have had to have, especially then. I mean, when you're a homeschooler, I guess not so much anymore. I think they've surrendered. I went from when I told people I was homeschooling to basically you're abusing your children to now they're like, well, it's not fair. I mean, I've had people say it's not fair that your children get an experience like that and other kids don't. Don't you think that's a little unfair that your kids get to live like that and other kids don't? I'm like, wow, like 10 years ago I was abusing my children, and now it's intrinsically unjust that my kids get to have this experience.
That's so great. The idea that you should illegalize something should not be allowed because it's so good. I think that summarizes so much ideology.
No, this is the conversations I've had. I'm sure you've had it. If you're a homeschooling parent, you've probably had these conversations where people tell you what's wrong with homeschooling. Then you explain to them how your children are educated. Then they literally say, well, that's just not fair. Like they have their own tutors. I look to Seneca, what Seneca said, spare no expense on tutors, spare no expense on literature and learning for your children. And that's how I look at it. Our kids one of the things I teach my kids is we have to live small so we can live large. And what I mean by that is, our overhead, when I listen to other families talk about expenses, is very, very, very low. But if you were to look at what we spend on ballet and horseback riding lessons and swim team and soccer and drama, that is the biggest expense in our family every month is tutors and enrichment activities, clubs, whatever. And so when I start explaining this to people, like, well, that's just not fair. Oh, your kids have that and other kids don't. Don't you think that's just not fair? But the conversation begins with how your poor children missing out on school. And then when you look at the cost of private schools, because I'm not opposed to schools, and so we've investigated sending them to good private schools, then when I break down, I could hire college professors to teach them trigonometry 3 hours a week, and I can hire the best art teacher in town to come over to my house for an hour. It just doesn't make sense. It's $13,000 a year to go to the good Catholic school where we live. But if I were to look at taking that $13,000, then you times 13,000 times 5. I mean, it's just out of control. But if you start taking that money, and go, I'll spend $13,000 on tutors, on camps, on enrichment activities. Yeah, wow. It's amazing what you can do. Then you throw in things like Masterclass, a subscription to Masterclass for $100 a month. Yeah, I don't know if you've checked out Masterclass, but there are all these enrichment opportunities that are out there where the best teachers in the world can pour right into your house.
Yeah, so I don't know Masterclass, but have you heard of the Teaching Company?
Oh, brother.
There's another one. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, our house is filled with Teaching Company courses, and I subscribe to Audible, 1 credit a month, and half those credits go to, Teaching Company is very expensive, right? $120, $200 a course sometimes. But if you subscribe to audible.com, it's basically comes down to $11 a masterclass.
Yeah. When I was 16, 17, 18 years old, I discovered the Teaching Company and great courses. And what I did is I went to my local library and said, hey, look at this magazine. These are the courses available for great courses. These are the ones that are 50% off or more. Since this is on sale, this piece on Aristotle's philosophy is 50% off. So now it's just $100.
Okay, I know who taught that one. I know who taught it. Father Katersky.
I don't know. I don't remember. Actually.
I did it.
There was one.
It was Father Katersky from Fordham. Great courses. Now,
and these are professors from the best college. I mean, these are Ivy League profs. And so I found this, and what I did is the library went halvesies with me on the courses. So you'd wait for a course to be 50% off or more, then you'd get the library to chip in 50% more of that discounted price. And I said, what I'll do is I'll take the course and then I'll drop it off at the library. And so I'd be paying next to nothing for these courses. And then when I was done with them, I'd drop it off to the library. And then one day I came in and there's this shelf that's labeled donated by Mr. Stephen Harriet. And I was like, this makes me feel like a grown-up. This is awesome.
That is so beautiful. That's what homeschool kids do. First of all, I'm appalled that they made you chip in half. That's unbelievable to me. Because at our library in Hawaii, we had all the great courses. Now, the Learning Company and the great courses, did they merge? Or are they two? Or did one of them buy out the other? I kind of think they're one company now.
They are one company, I think. Yeah. And right now, I think they're called the Great Courses because I have some kind of a subscription.
Yeah, so we subscribe to it. We subscribe to it on our television, and it's unbelievable. But yeah, going back to right when I got out of college, I would do a lot of them. And Father Katersky taught the one on Aristotle's Politics. He also did one on natural law, as did Hadley Arcus. Yeah, the best professors in the world. You got the Yale Open courses is another great one. There's so many wonderful resources out there that your mom and dad didn't have these resources that we had today.
Yeah, and it's so funny too because people sit around and say, "Oh my gosh, college is a scam. When are we going to destroy the universities and da 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 da?" There should be some way around this, and I'm like, well, they already have things that you can do to get around it. You can get tuition-free Yale for $25 a month.
You literally know. I think open courses is free. Yale open courses is 100% free. And
Yeah.
I mean, look, I can reach up. I actually have the course notes to some of them. Hold on. I wish this was visual. I'm grabbing one right now. Yeah, here's one. I love this one. The Stephen B. Smith. He's a third-generation Straussian. Has one on political philosophy, Yale open courses. And then I just bought the course notes, but it's free. You don't have to buy the course notes.
I met him once.
He seems kind of odd.
Sorry?
What is he like? He strikes me as he tells the corniest jokes in his courses. What was he like?
I had one brief interaction with him. I was an assistant at a seminar series, and he came in once to get coffee or something in the cafeteria. You know, I'm running that stuff, and I'm down there and I'm getting out a coffee cup or putting up the coffee cups or whatever. He says, "Would you mind handing me one?" So I hand him one. And he said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And I stood up and looked at him and said, "Thanks." And I just said, "Thank you, God."
What? He's a strange guy. His jokes are so strange. He tells these very strange jokes, and he's like Strauss for beginners, because, you know, Leo Strauss would always have this sort of technique where he would get the conventions out of the way. And, you know, but what Stephen Smith will do in his courses, he'll say, convention dictates that and then I'll state it, you know, and I'm like, oh, how very Straussian of you. It's just very, but you know what? It's a great course, and I'm very grateful for it. I was speaking of Yale. Well, where did you run into him? Were you at Yale?
No, I used to run, Robert Royal's Faith and Reason seminar series.
Oh, it was for Robert Royal, is another national treasure. He's from my wife's hometown. So I'm reading this great novel now. You got to read it. It's called Minor Indignities. I'm halfway through, but work keeps getting in the way. I started it yesterday. I'd be done. It's written by this guy, Trevor Merrill, and he runs a Girard Foundation. But it's a look at campus life in the 90s. Through the lens of Girard. It's really a beautiful novel. Strikingly, I didn't want to read it because, I get all these books to read, and they're usually horrible. And when I hear, first-time novelist, that's like the last thing I want to read, you know? A first-time novel is like a second lieutenant in the infantry. Second lieutenants are generally horrible soldiers, you know, and then the ones that become captains, you know, most of them wash out and never make it to even 03. And the ones that become captains are pretty good. You know, once you get past 03, they're all great. And in fact, all my captains are great. So, you know, when someone gets to their third published novel, they're probably pretty good. But, you know, the first-time novelists, it's just like, oh, Lord, I have to read this. But it's absolutely beautiful. It's set at Yale. So, yeah, well, we started with Squanto. We went to homeschooling, from homeschooling to open courses to Yale, to now that led me to a novel set in Yale in the 90s, Minor Indignities. Thank God for ADHD.
Yeah, I think I talked to Squanto then. That's about perfect.
Wait, what's that? What did you say?
I was just going to say we kind of skipped over him and kind of trampled all over his legacy, but that's kind of what we're supposed to do.
Wait, why are we supposed to trample all over Squanto's legacy? Explain that to me.
Well, it's just that's the purpose of our ancestors and our forebears is to make life easy for us, and so that we don't have to think. Yeah, you don't have to think so much or work so hard.
Yeah, I think, yeah. That's why I wanted to talk about Squanto, because, again, that was my whole point, right? I never learned about Squanto. And he's one of the most intriguing and beautiful characters in the history of our nation, of our people, of our history. Mm-hmm. And it took Charles Schultz and Charlie Brown to even give me a little hint that he existed. If not for Charlie Brown, I would have never known that Squanto existed until I became a Catholic, and then it was presented the neat Catholic narrative of Catholic Native American saves Puritans from England. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, it's if you have time, the thought that occurred, I had a whole series of, I have trips. This is why I don't do drugs, because my brain basically is a drug. Whenever I approach a new subject, I have trips. And with Squanto, it was a good trip. And my first thought about Squanto is when you start to read about him, if you just start to read the bare facts of the man's life, there's this poison in me from current ideological commentary that makes me want to look down on Squanto and his story and say, well, yeah, this is probably all papered over. And I'm not going to be naive enough that I think that this classic story about America, America's forebears could be anything other than some sort of a lie that's made for the purpose of covering up some American atrocity, right? The typical stuff that you would hear from college students today, right? And then I start to look more into him, and I'm thinking, well, actually, there's no reason to sneer at this. And it would be cynical not to see something beautiful in this character, right? Yeah, and so that was an interesting right there. But then beyond that, what I immediately was thinking of Squanto was just like you mentioned at the outset, the tremendous trauma he went through. And he's a reminder to me, again, of I'm so glad that we have essentially the same heritage he did, right? We being Catholics, we have the same heritage as the friars who baptized him and instructed him in the faith. And I'm really glad we have that because it helps us make sense of trauma and suffering. And Squanto is an example of that as well. And that's really cool. So that was kind of my starting point with him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to make a film on the life of Squanto that try to explore his life the way Mel Gibson did The Passion of the Christ. Prior to Mel Gibson's film, we had these sort of glazed over, sort of, you see it out of the corner of your eye, Ben-Hur sort of look at the crucifixion. Or some hippie on a cross type of thing, with a few minor wounds, but his feathered hair is still, nicely combed. And then we had the Passion of the Christ. And then you got to see Mary with her son's corpse, and blood and mud and dirt is smeared on her face, and her son with more wounds than one could count draped across her lap. And when we look at the life of Squanto, and you try to, we forget that these are real human beings, that Squanto was a real human being that was enslaved, that was taken away from his home, that daydreamed every day for 10 years about seeing his friends and his family and fishing in the same creek, or, it doesn't take much to try to understand that's what got him through, and the sorrow and the confusion. We can't even begin to imagine. And yet, that was just the beginning of his story. And the legacy was a 75-year peace treaty.
Right.
I would love, can you imagine? And it was just, so many of our ancestors lived this life, even to the most recent immigrants. I think you and I talked about the movie Brooklyn before together. Have we talked about Brooklyn?
I don't think we have, no.
Oh, it's this beautiful film on a young Irish woman that emigrates to the United States from Ireland in the early 20th century. And the loneliness and the alienation and the trauma and the confusion and everything that went with that, right? Young Irish girls being lured into prostitution and all of this. And like you said, as you were saying tongue in cheek, we don't want to think about this, the sacrifice that others made for us to live. I mean, where guys like me, who's just a general schmuck, can live a pretty great life. It was you love Westerns. Have you seen The Searchers, the best Western of all time? John Wayne's The Searchers?
No, I haven't. I tried to see it. My brother-in-law said it looked boring, so we had to switch to something else, like Austin Powers or some crap.
No, you need to watch The Searchers. There's a great scene, these Scandinavian immigrants. It's just a beautiful film. It's unbelievable. And, John Wayne, who's been just smeared and slandered, his love for Native Americans, everyone knows, right? And his courageous and honest look at that experience. But in the Searchers, there's these Scandinavian.
And by the way, and for Italian Catholics. I mean, he married 3 of them.
Yeah, he married some Mexicans too. He married 3 Italian Catholics, or did you mean to say Mexican Catholics?
I probably meant to say Mexican.
You got
Not the same.
Wow. You're racist. We're going to cancel you.
I know.
You can't tell the difference.
Yeah,
they're all the same to you. And if they're not Irish,
well, I mean,
German, Italian, Mexican, it's all the same to me. They're not Irish.
Well, to be fair, every non-white person I've ever met thinks I'm Irish, and I don't have a drop of Irish blood.
Well, I thought you were Irish. So they got to cancel me. What are you?
I'm a Scottish and English and Dutch.
Wait, did you say every non-white person who meets you thinks you're Irish?
Yeah, they say, "Are you Irish?" No, I'm not.
And I thought you were Irish, which means maybe I'm a non-white. I'm going to identify as a non-white person.
I think it would be safe to do that. Yeah, at this point.
So you're Scottish.
Yeah, Scottish, English, Dutch. I probably look mostly English, unfortunately.
Do you think that were your Scottish ancestors? Were they miners? What were they? What brought them here?
Yeah, I don't know. I have to research. I have a great aunt who has researched our family tree, and my family lost track of it for the most part. So I have to piece it together by searching out these people, because there was a big breach, and my parents never taught me about our ancestry, so I have to go find it on my own accord. But I will do that.
Yeah, and I think that's what's important at Thanksgiving time. It is to be thoughtful of our ancestors, right? They are us. I mean, they lived lives. They sacrificed for us, and I will tell you, I dig deep into my family tree. And I try to explore and get to know about many of them. Some of them were kind of well known and would write and were involved in public office, so I can learn a lot about them and their struggles and losing, children to childhood illness, or brothers that died in this war, that war, and then you kind of follow the trail, right? And it leads to just my immediate grandparents who, the trauma of the wars that they had to fight, and the wounds that they had, the Purple Hearts that they had, and the battles that they were in. But then I discover, their grandparents or parents fought in this war and that war. And it's been sort of relentless for my family, the wars, war after war, generation after generation. And that was something that was really startling to see. And you take pride in it. I take pride in the fact that my family has served this country, and not even in this country. My grandmother's father was a cavalry officer and fought in the Boer Wars, and then came to Illinois, where he raced horses, of all things. But then think of this: my grandmother's father fought in the Boer Wars. Well, 2 of his sons fought in World War II, and one was wounded, never to walk again at Pearl Harbor. And then my other great uncle, Uncle Ted, was basically a hobo after the war. He had disability. He had 12, can you believe this? Over the course of the war, he had 12 purple oak leaf clusters.
Oh, geez.
I think it was the most in Illinois history. Yeah. And so he just tramped around Illinois. I mean, tramped around the country. And he would show up, but he had some sort of disability, some sort of benefits, but he would live at hotels, and he would always show up with some candy from the 1920s. He would give me rock candy and candy corn. You're like, what is this? 1920, Uncle Ted? I don't eat rock candy. What do you give me rock candy with your lint from your pocket? But then, so I think it is important, because then what it does is it puts the fear of God in you. When I look back at the history of my ancestors, it puts the fear of God in me, of the type of life my posterity might have to live, and that we have to order our life for them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there's also something that kind of comes to mind. The thing is, like, conservatives sometimes have a pitfall where they will maybe oversimplify a little bit when they talk about the past versus now and how good we have it, right? We do have it good, right? And I don't deny that. We really do. I was just telling my wife today, because I'm a jerk. She said some minor complaint about something, and I said, I just read from Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation that half of the pilgrims died before they celebrated Thanksgiving, and she told me to shut up. But there's something missing sometimes from that. Is that I was just thinking of this today, that there's all these studies now of how unhappy people are. There's that book. There's a huge bestseller, maybe in the 90s or 80s, Entertaining Ourselves to Death. Walker Percy wrote The Moviegoer, which is about a lazy guy who's really got a lot of character flaws. He doesn't suffer anything major, but he still can't figure it out, but he's so unhappy, right? It's about decadence in a way, right? And all these studies say the same thing. Many people are extremely unhappy. People who are upper middle class and have no real trauma in their lives are happy. And I was thinking of Squanto. Squanto suffered a ton and then died quite young, right? Many of the pilgrims died very young amid grueling labor trying to make a new home in the Plymouth settlement. And yet they celebrated Thanksgiving. And I was just thinking to myself that I was thinking this is kind of a meditation in the fact that human life maybe is inherently fraught with risk and danger and suffering. And at the end of it, you lose everything. I mean, there are no exceptions. This is just human life, right?
Yeah, it's like that scene in Good Will Hunting where, not Good Will Hunting, I'm sorry. I always get those two movies confused. There's Good Will Hunting, Dead Poets Society. And where they're looking at the picture of the students. You've seen Dead Poets Society, right?
Yeah.
And they're looking at one of the early classes from a century before, an old black and white photo, and Robin Williams is having them look at it. He's like, "Can you hear what they're saying to you? Carpe diem, seize the day." He's like, "They're all dead." He says, "Everyone there has something in common with you. You will be spending most of the rest of eternity pushing up daisies." And that's something that so is that what you're saying? It's something we forget.
Yeah. And the whole point of really, actually, this is the point of looking into the history of Squanto, reading anything. It's the point of virtue. It's the point of trying to discover and conform your life to the light of reason, is to impose some order and meaning, right? To make it meaning. You're going to suffer. I mean, actually, this nun I once knew, Sister Gertrude Gillette, she said, "Everyone suffers. The saints are those who know how to suffer well." And that's a great point. You're going to suffer. Look at all of the data actually confirms it. People are unhappy. Comfortable upper class millennials who have never had anything go wrong are unhappy. And they don't know what to do with their unhappiness. They don't know how to piece it together into something meaningful, something maybe even self-sacrificial, something that will leave a mark on posterity. And, I think the saints are not devoid of unhappiness. I don't think you are. I don't think anyone is. But some people know how to make sense of it and make it meaningful, make it worthwhile,
Well, I think about this. I don't think I struggle with unhappiness. I do struggle with profound sorrow, but I think I'm happy. So I don't know what the difference is. What is the difference between sorrow and unhappiness?
Unhappiness is something that maybe involves more the will more. So in other words, if you're unhappy, you're basically contributing to it somehow. Sorrow might be more like the passion, right? Christ's passion was something. It's the same root as passive. It's something done to him.
Yeah, like there's a wound,
so maybe that's
right? Like you can look at it and say, that wound doesn't consume me, but I have that gash on my arm, or, right? Like I can see it. I know the cause of it, and it's profound sorrow. but I can even be happy in the midst of experiencing sorrow. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah, because like happiness in classical works is almost a synonym for blessedness, right? Um, Happiness, it's like beatitude, the ultimate beatitude being heaven. The saints are happy. You would never say the saints are unhappy. You'd never even say Christ is unhappy. Well, he suffered a lot, right? But that wasn't contradictory to happiness. But yeah, he experienced sorrow. He experienced wounds. So yeah, maybe that's the distinction.
Yeah, when you were talking about Squanto, and I was thinking of someone I met. Like I'm trying to think, who have I ever known? I have a friend. His name is Mahmoud. He's Nuba. He's from the Nuba Mountains, and he met a good friend of mine 25 years ago when my buddy threw his corpse, what he thought was a dead corpse, onto a Red Cross plane when there was a war in Sudan. Well, Mahmoud lived. He had serious wounds. You put your hand through parts of his head. You know, it's just disgusting. But when we were in Sudan together, he had all this sort of traumatic life, right? Like literally his body's so filled with shrapnel, he was presumed dead, to his wife and his children being sent to live in Australia, but he works in Sudan still. And we were in, I think I told you the story when I was in Sudan and they wanted to kidnap and kill us, the Janjaweed. And then they were asking us for money to live. Have I ever told you this story?
Yes, you have, but tell it again.
Well, I won't tell you the whole story, but at one point, I'll never forget Mahmoud. I mean, he's from the Nuba Mountains, so he's not tall like the Dinka. He's a short guy. He's the biggest smile on his face all the time, and he's got a tank top. And he's understanding them, right? The Janjaweed, the devils on horseback, when they're asking for Mahmoud. They're like, you hold Mahmoud. We'll hold Mahmoud. Will you go get us the money? We'll let you go, but we got to hold Mahmoud. And he's cracking up. Like he's got this big smile. And these vicious terrorists are like negotiating with him. And I look at him. I don't know what they're saying at this point. And he's got this biggest grin on his face. And he's laughing in the midst of this horrible, you know. Could you imagine, Stephen, you're in the middle of nowhere, Sudan, a country 1/3 the size of the United States. It's as big as America, basically from the Mississippi River to the eastern seaboard. It's a big country. You're smack dab in the middle of a remote part of that with the Janjaweed who are like, well, we're going to hold Stephen while you go get us money. I don't think you'd have the biggest grinning white smile. Like, oh, you know, do what you guys got to do. And we're like, no, we're not going to leave you here, Mahmoud. At the end, Mahmoud stayed with these folks and ended up baptizing them. I probably shouldn't tell the story. The guy was something else. So when I think was Squanto a guy like that, who in the midst of all that trauma, because I picture maybe he was brooding and sorrowful, or maybe was he just a guy who accepted the reality of life and could keep a smile the whole time? I don't know. And yet here,
I'd like to think.
I'm sorry.
You got to think. There's some evidence for that, because if he were a grousing person, how would he go from being abducted into slavery to returning a free man to the very place where he was abducted from?
Yeah, good point.
And on the slave, he was put up for sale as a slave in Spain. Then he was taken in by friars. I don't think that a person who's generally lethargic and brooding would do very well in that scenario. So yeah, I could imagine him that way.
And could you think of a more bizarre experience than a Native American for sale in Spain at that time period? That would be like you and I would have to be abducted by aliens, taken to a distant planet, and be for sale at their shopping mall. To even begin to make it comparative. Don't you think that would be a fair comparison?
Yeah, I mean, the English, the guy Hunt who abducted him and sold him, very different looking, totally different dress, totally different customs, tall,
smell.
bony.
Think of the smells, the different smells, how we smell as a people, especially then.
Yeah, we wouldn't have smelled the same. Would have smelled like, our secretions would be different because of a completely different diet.
I mean,
it would be pretty weird.
Unbelievable. So when you and I were talking earlier, I think we should wrap this podcast up. I was saying, I don't know what I know what my podcast is about, right? Like, I want this podcast is about defending the vulnerable from violence and fitting that in there, but you can't talk about it every episode. And then I said, I think I found the real line of gesture for this show. That Hannah Arendt said that, we live in a world where we have to think without banisters after Nietzsche. The banisters have been removed. Well, with the scandal of the church hierarchy for Catholics and for Protestants, the victimism that we see from church leaders across the board, across the denominations, the breakdown in all of our institutions, from our lack of respect for intelligence agencies, the FBI, to the NBA, we are now living in a world without banisters, right? And I thought, okay, I want my podcast to be a banister. I don't know. I think maybe, did we do that today? I don't know. What did we do? Maybe.
Did we provide banister? I think, yeah. In a way, in other words, what we're doing is connecting a thread of humanity, of nobility between a distant, foreign thing in our forebear, Squanto, right, to now. We're the same species. His living well looks recognizable to us, and it's possible for us to find it attractive and to even align ourselves with him shoulder to shoulder and live well similarly. It's not as though we are completely without context, floating a void, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that we are part of if we were to bracket humanity, Squanto would be in the same category as us, as citizens of a new world. Post-barbarian, post-tribal, post-other. Right? Where he was Native American and Christian. Where he could bridge between Protestant and Catholic, the Europeans and the Native Americans or the Indians. By the way, I wish we could call them Indians. I have Indian friends who tell me, don't call us Native Americans, call us Indians. Do you know where Indian comes from, really? Not what we're told by our Marxist professors, but where it really comes from, and why so many tribes go by Indian, not Native American?
Tell me.
Indios, like God, God-like people. That's how the Spanish saw them. Not as subhuman, not as lesser than, but as more than. And by the way, that fits the narrative with Europeans. They were always sort of in awe. Not that there wasn't exploitation and violence and cruelty, but especially on first contact, there was almost this sort of deification. We know of the later desire to exploit and the attraction of subhumanism, like when Virginia denied that Native Americans were persons in their Supreme Court. But Indios means godlike. This is what my Native American friends tell me, my Indian friends. And they go, don't call me me Native American. Call me Indian because of its dignity.
That's beautiful. I did not know that.
Beautiful, right? I think it's beautiful. Stephen, I think you have to go eat turkey in cranberry sauce.
Yeah, my wife makes actually the best brined chicken I have ever had anywhere. Our kids are going to grow up and say, it's not like my mom made it. She makes amazing chicken. So we're going to have chicken, actually.
Is that what you're going to have chicken? Okay, so what's on the menu? And let's wrap it up with this. Yesterday we had Dr. Ted Bear on. He gave us a list of his movies. And we're sponsored by Movie to Movement. What's the one movie that are you going to watch a movie together as a family this Thanksgiving?
We may, but the last one we just rewatched was the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was way better than I remembered. Sounds hokey because it just came out, but it's actually 20 years old almost. So do check it out.
It seems like it just came out. It's unbelievable that it's almost 20. You're right. It's almost 20 years old, and it feels like it just came out yesterday to me.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I remember how excited I was. I saw it at the Union Station Theater in Washington, D.C. with my friend she was a speechwriter for the president. And she was, I was excited, but she was over the moon excited. And then, of course, when each one came out, it seemed like forever. And have you ever done just you binged all 3 together?
Yeah, that's what we just did. A week or so.
Oh, that's in like one sitting as a family, just covered in blankets.
Oh well, no, we watched 2. We watched them 3 days in a row.
Okay. Have you watched Jojo Rabbit with your family yet?
Yeah, I watched it. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I'm encouraging everyone to watch Jojo Rabbit. Well, Steven, why don't you wrap this up? I want you to go eat at Thanksgiving, and my family's waiting for me too. I can wrap this up for everyone. Or do you want me to wrap it up?
You wrap it up, and but thank you very much for having me on. I can't wait till in the near future. I can tell everyone that I met Jason Jones before he got disappeared. So that's gonna be exciting.
Whoa! I thought you were gonna say before he got famous.
No, you're already famous. Unfortunately for you,
I'm going to be disappeared.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't President Xi going to be elected or inaugurated in January?
President who?
Xi, right, from China.
Oh, he doesn't like me.
That is just what it's on.
Yeah, no, they don't like me. That's for sure. But I have the gold coin. I'm an American citizen. They're not going to disappear me. You know, okay. I'm not going to be disappeared. I'm not suicidal. I'm harmless. There's nothing to fear here, nothing to see here. Foreign regimes, just leave me alone.
In fact, you hang out with Hunter Biden all the time.
Yeah, Hunter Biden is my friend. No, I feel sorry for that guy. Honestly, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, well, you know what? Listen, if I am disappeared, you gotta write the movie on my life, The Disappearing of Jason Jones.
Will do. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm gonna cast. Who do you want cast as you?
Dolph Lundgren. Dolph Lundgren is Jason Jones.
Nice.
Yeah, he'd have to drink a lot of beer, probably. Stop working out for a while. He'd round out his face a little bit, and you'd have to use a makeup artist to make his proportions not so symmetrical. Or you could just cast Gary Busey. You could just cast Gary Busey. you could either go
that would be awesome.
Gary Busey as Jason Jones.
Gary Busey as Jason Jones. I love it.
Disappearing of Jason Jones, starring Gary Busey. Yeah, that would be good. I might like Amy Semple McPherson, the founder of the Foursquare Church. You know how she faked her own death?
No.
Oh, she's such an awesome woman, such a very interesting woman. But she faked her own death because she was having some sort of affair. And but she was like a founder of this big movement. It's still very big in the world. And I learned about her because I worked on a play that Kathy Lee Gifford wrote called Scandal, I think it was called. But she faked her own death. I might disappear myself for several years just so this movie, you'll have to make this movie and I can watch it. And then after the movie comes out, I'll reveal that I faked my own death just so Gary Busey could play me.
I think that's a good plan. I wish you hadn't aired it because I kind of want to steal the idea because I can see Orlando Bloom.
Well, Gary Busey plays me and Orlando Bloom plays you?
That's right, yeah.
Oh, okay. Some of us got issues. What's that? Hey, Steven, I'm going to let you go eat turkey, and I'm going to wrap this show up.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for filling in for Eric Metaxas. All right, brother. God bless. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
All right, guys. I got to figure out how to stop that beeping. That was our special Thanksgiving special. You see how we went from Eric Metaxas to Squanto to Yale Open Courses to I don't know where we went. But hey, thank you for listening. I just wanted to talk about Squanto. I promised you yesterday we would talk about Squanto today. And he is one of those people I want the world to know. And really, I'm serious. I have a queue of stories I'd like to tell. And exploring who Squanto really was. Obviously we're not going to know who Squanto really was, but just to explore and through a screenplay, through film, and try to understand the experience of Squanto, because it is truly maybe the first American story. And I'm always surprised at how so many people don't understand that he's not just the Indian that taught the pilgrims to put a minnow underneath the corn seed so the corn seed would grow. I mean, that's really what I knew of Squanto growing up. That, he was like, oh, all you have to do is put a minnow next to the corn seed and the stalk will grow, and they didn't starve to death. And then when I learned that he had been a slave, that he had converted to Catholicism, that he learned the trade of carpentry, I believe, that he came back to the New World, his tribe was decimated, went to another tribe, the alienation, the loneliness, the confusion, the loss, the questions for God as creator, the feeling of, we don't know what it's like. I converted to Christianity from an atheist. What is the dynamic of the people that shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with you played a role in your enslavement and the decimation of your tribe? How does the feelings of confusion and betrayal and the questions one has for God and the loneliness and the alienation, one can only begin to understand. But that is, to me, a real, a crucial part of the Thanksgiving story, the life of Squanto. And so through the midst of all the silliness, we talked to you about Squanto. This episode has been brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project. Go to thegreatcampaign.org, check us out, and Movie to Movement, promoting a culture of life, love, and beauty through the power of film. If you are looking for a good film to watch this Thanksgiving, go to salemnow.com. Check out our film, Divided Hearts of America, where we reveal the secret that will unite us as a country. It's right there in that movie. What will unite us as a country? It's always been with us. It's the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration Principle, the truth that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and we have an equal dignity that emanates from the truth of our anthropology. We're the only country in the history of the world founded on an anthropology. Thank you, God, on this Thanksgiving for revealing to us the truth of who we are, the truth that each and every one of us has an incomparable dignity. We're grateful for that. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you for spending part of it with The Jason Jones Show. And that was, by the way, Stephen Harriott, one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite people. I'm glad he was on. Until next time, The Jason Jones Show. Aloha.
This has been The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.